Right. We are dealing with very important things now, and I would first stress the unique nature of the accession of Finland and Sweden compared to most, or if not all, other steps of NATO enlargement in recent decades. In view of the perception by other NATO countries, US and others, of the added value for NATO to have these two countries being part of it, because of their democratic credentials, their territories, and their military resources now put at the disposal of NATO's overall deterrence uh, capabilities. So this leads me at least to reflect a little bit upon the comparison between NATO adding its commitments now to a much larger area, defending militarily concretely and deterring Russian aggression concretely over a much larger area, such that now not only the long Finnish-Russian border needs to be defended, but also behind it the Baltic Sea, which now becomes more or less a NATO internal lake, with a few exceptions and few points of accession to that sea area by Russia, and then behind it Sweden, and Sweden providing them the strategic depth by NATO in its defense of the borders, not only with the Baltic countries, Russia, but also the Finnish long border. So you have the dual situation of NATO having to increase its commitments to a much larger area, but you also have the added resources and the territorial advantage of having the two countries becoming members. We need to, I think, to think about in these things in terms of this dual aspect, adding commitments, being receiving added resources in the overall ambition of deterring Russian aggression. And there you have to think in terms also of, on the one hand, immediate threats following the Ukraine aggression, and more long-term strategies of deterrence vis-a-vis Russia, regardless of outcomes of the current immediate crisis. And there you have the balance between deterrence and defense, which of course coincide to a large extent. The stronger your show of military strength, defense capabilities, the stronger the deterrence. But focusing on deterrence is a much broader question also of what you do in peacetime, what kind of exercises will there be in the Baltic Sea, for example, that will serve the purpose of deterrence, and also a credible commitment on the part of the overall power of NATO to deter future aggression, bearing in mind also that future aggression may be something quite different to what aggression seems to imply today in view of the Ukraine crisis. So you have these various aspects, which in turn will lead to very interesting questions concerning what can the role play between the Nordic countries now be, what should it be, and how should it be worked out in relation to the overall NATO planning. That brings us to the level of defense planning and deterrence defense balancing in the planning stages, where we and the Finns will now be competent parties to a broader planning process, which will imply very intricate questions of role play. What should be the role of Finnish resources, Swedish, etc., combined efforts of Danes, of Norwegians, of Swedes and Finns in this overall balancing game between deterrence and defense planning concretely. And this in turn, but much later, will then have consequences which we can now have some influence over as members. What will be the command structure that is going to be created on the basis, as you say, of the overall game plan concerning defense planning, deterrence planning, balancing conventional and nuclear deterrence, the comparing concrete war situation planning, acute crisis planning, and then peacetime operations, but all being somehow part of a broader whole where we now will be part. So it's a fascinating next 2 years to deal with all these questions where we will be full-time partners.